my dad worked for like 35 years for the U.S. Army. I grew up around Fort Monmouth down in New Jersey. And he was able to like retire a year early. And I remember asking him, Dad, why are you retiring a year early? And he like hadn't taken a vacation. And like I said, I never noticed. But I always thought that was a terrible idea. I think it should be sort of a requirement that you can't carry over like 20 years of vacation. I think vacations are important. So I certainly hope you guys all take some time away from the day-to-day work. And as you'll see today, there may be some real value to that because we're going to be talking about learning and talking about different techniques for learning. And you'll see that, what goes on in your mind, perhaps when you're not working, may be just as important as when you're focusing and concentrating on a problem. So a little bit of time away from that MacBook Air that you're staring into all day might not be so bad. So now we're going to focus on learning methods, obviously for enterprise security. That's what we all do. We're security folks. We're sort of dancing into areas that are more around leadership and business and management, and even personal growth. But that's the idea. We'll place it in the context of enterprise security. So for those of you who may be new to the session, this is session 4, you can go back and look at the other ones. It's been my observation that most of us are pretty good at learning the technology. And you have nice courses at Cybrary that will help you in that regard. But to become a successful leader, manager, executive, even a group leader, you don't be some crazy executive, you just be leading a small team. To do that, the skills that are required are usually things that cybersecurity people are not good at. And we spent, during the first 3 sessions, we looked at some of the areas where you may not have a lot of facility. Now, this one is different. Like this is learning because if you're a nerd like me, then you think, I have no problem learning. And your mind immediately goes to calculus and physics and Python 1, 2, and 3 and operating systems. I can learn that stuff really well. Like I can sit in a math class and learn number theory and really enjoy it. But learning other things may not be such a comfortable experience. So we're going to focus maybe a little bit less on technical learning and more around experiential learning and ingesting kind of what's going on around you. And you'll see in a little bit the power of guessing. And that's something that we learn as scientists. I'll talk about that in the context of George Polya, who may be the most interesting contributor, at least in the last 100 years, to techniques for learning. And he knew how to talk to people who were techies because he was a math professor at Stanford. So we'll look a little bit at some of the things that he I think taught. Now we always start with like some sentence here that I write out. And the emphasis here, by the way, continuous learning. That's why it's the different color. I think if you share a generation with me, and if you do, you have my sympathy because I'm getting so darn old. But if you're in your 40s, 50s, or older, then learning was this discrete thing you did, right? Like at the high school, at the college, and then you graduated, and you did your learning, and now you go get a job, and there's no learning. You do what you got to do. I mentioned my dad earlier. It's a unique guy, by the way, the 2nd or 3rd PhD in computer science anywhere ever, University of Pennsylvania. He was doing electrical engineering. They said, hey, can we call this computer science, 1966. He was one of the first examples I ever saw of somebody who would always keep learning. I thought it was sort of odd. It would be not unusual. My dad's like 87 now, 80, almost 88. But it would be unusual when I came home to see him sitting on a chair with a physics book. And I'd say, Dad, why are you reading that? You go, well, I always wondered about, this electromagnetic something or other, because I didn't really get it in college. And I want to know it now. I remember that sticking with me when I was a kid. I know in some sense that seems sort of pointless, but it's sort of not. And you'll see as we go through it that the habit of wanting to continually learn is really quite a wonderful habit and something that makes sense. And by the way, I know there's some questions and answers that people are offering. Go ahead and pop them up. If it looks like what you're asking is appropriate or connected to what I'm talking about, I'll pause for that. There's a couple. I know John's asking the question. Those will get it. You go ahead and answer them. Some of the more housekeeping type questions will certainly get answered before we're done. So keep them coming. We do monitor the questions and answers. Now, let's look at, we always do a model. And I'm going to show you a model that I think is okay. But then I'm going to talk about Polya's model, which may actually be better. And I don't know. The whole idea is you got to come up with one, which will be the point in a minute that I'll get to. That it's not a model. It's your model, what you do to learn. So some people would start by saying, you just go off and learn. And I remember in my own life, when I was a technologist at Bell Labs, I was a pure geek working in the lab. And I realized I was becoming a supervisor. So they sent me off to Columbia Business School to learn things I didn't understand. I didn't know what an income statement was. I didn't know what EBITDA was. Still not sure I know what it is, but you get the point. Stuff like that, like real basic stuff. And if you're like me, most cybersecurity folks are very direct. And if you have confidence, you're willing to admit when you don't know something. So I was admitting things that seemed shocking to others. Like I would say, what's the difference between profit and margin? And everyone would gasp. And then they'd realize maybe they didn't know either. I don't even know now. Is there a difference? Well, that's the point. So they sent me off and I learned quite a bit. And generally, it viewed in that macro sense, when you're learning something, just continual learning, the first thing you're going to want to do is go back and discuss it. Like learning is infectious, right? If you are watching podcasts and it's some idea that sticks with you, like you might have a favorite podcaster up on the sort of that gruffy sort of area, like somebody like Joe Rogan, right? He has all these people come on and there's very, I don't know, sometimes a little edgy. He had Elon Musk on, they like smoked weed on there, whatever. But when you're learning and listening, you want to discuss it. With me, it's my wife. When she's cooking, pour a glass of wine. We talk about stuff that we learned and did. That's been our habit we've been married for 35 years. It's one of the best parts of the day. That when you learn something, you want to discuss. Like I couldn't imagine living on a deserted island for my life and what you learn, but kind of what good is it, right? Learning is this collective thing. So you want to discuss it. And then you want to put it into some sort of practice. Like you'll do something with it, try and apply it, something that has come up. It may be esoteric in some sense. Esoteric learning means it's hard to do this step. But for example, one of the things, we're going to talk to Leif Jackson later on during our time here. I'll quit about 15 minutes early. We'll talk to Leif. You'll learn that cyber is one of the important things that there's a lot of focus and emphasis on. It's not learning for the sake of learning. It's learning so you can put things into practice. And I think that's really, really, really important. When a tree falls in the woods, does anybody hear it? My belief is no. And when something is learned and it's not put into practice, is it worth it? I kind of think no. I think that learning has to be something that is goal-oriented. You may disagree, but this is a model. And again, when we get to, in a minute, we'll look at some alternate views here that might be sort of interesting for you. Apply means once you've put in practice, then it can become a habit. Like I could have put the word habit here, where this really becomes something that is part of your daily routine. I have this way of dealing with worry. I blogged about it on LinkedIn about actually before COVID. A lot of people said, what were you predicting COVID? And I just noticed, because I coach CISOs, I spend a lot of time in my consulting practice, I coach. And I noticed a growing percentage of people I work with lamenting their fears and their worries. And I always found Dale Carnegie's How to Stop Worrying and Start Living to be an amazing tool for not worrying. And I almost memorized the book and all these techniques, and I share them with the folks that I coach. And I found that for some of them, they actually apply it in their day-to-day life. There's these ideas, these thought ideas about how you can minimize worry. If you don't know that book by Dale Carnegie, I think you can get it for free on the internet, probably violating every copyright law in the book. But I think like on YouTube, you can hear somebody read it or something. I recommend you do it. And then finally, I think this slide comes a little blurry, but you get the idea. Challenge means